Beloved, I want you to hear this today. God cannot use an unbroken vessel. It is the brokenness that prepares the vessel to carry His power, His glory, and His purposes. Oh, how many of us try to serve God with our pride, our self-sufficiency, our unhealed wounds, and wonder why our ministry, our prayers, our lives feel empty or ineffective? And you see, a vessel that is whole in its own strength resists the refining fire of the Spirit. It clings to control. It clings to comfort. But God's work is never in the comfortable. God's work is in the surrendered, in the broken, in the humbled. And the scriptures tell us that the earthen vessel, fragile, cracked, and humble, holds the treasure of God. Not because of its strength, not because of its perfection, but because it acknowledges it cannot contain the power without Him. When we are broken, we learn to depend on God completely. Our limitations become the stage for His unlimited power. And do not despise the trials, the seasons of testing, the heartbreaks. They are not punishments, they are His workshop. The pressure you feel, the loneliness, the questions, the nights you weep. These are the chisels in God's hands, shaping you into a vessel fit for His glory. And I tell you, when the Spirit of God finds a broken vessel, something extraordinary happens. The pride falls away. The ego melts. The self will dies, and suddenly God's power flows without obstruction. Healing flows, miracles happen, lives are transformed, hearts are changed, but hear me carefully, if you resist the breaking, if you refuse the pruning, if you hold on to the old self, you block the Spirit. God cannot pour into a heart that is already full of its own ideas, ambitions and self-reliance. The cup must be emptied, the vessel must be broken, before it can overflow with His glory. And so I ask you today, are you willing to be broken? Are you willing to let go of your control, your pride, your comfort, your plans, and simply surrender to His refining? For it is in that surrender, in that brokenness, that God finds a vessel He can use, powerful, radiant, and filled with His presence. And oh, let Him break you. Let Him mold you. Let Him empty you. For only in brokenness do we discover the fullness of His power, the wonder of His mercy, and the depth of His love. And then, beloved, watch as God uses you in ways your unbroken self could never imagine. God's power flows only through surrendered, broken vessels, not through prideful self-sufficiency. So many times we think that our strength, our talent, or our ability to plan and execute will make us effective in the work of God. But the truth is that anything that is carried out in our own strength is limited and hollow. When a heart is clinging to its own understanding, to its own ideas of how things should be done, it blocks the flow of God's Spirit. The power of God is not released into hearts that are full of pride, self-reliance, or the desire to control. God desires a vessel that has been emptied of its own ambition, a heart that says, "Not my will, but yours be done." When the Spirit finds someone who has surrendered fully, someone who has allowed the storms, trials, and disappointments to humble them, He is free to move without obstruction. It is in the broken, contrite spirit that God chooses to pour His power, His anointing, and His authority. A vessel that is whole in itself will resist the refining fire because it believes it already has what it needs. But a vessel that is willing to be broken, a heart that acknowledges its weakness, becomes pliable in the hands of the Master. He can shape it, mold it, fill it with His Spirit, and use it to accomplish things far beyond human comprehension. The glory of God is not seen in those who rely on themselves, but in those who yield fully to His will, who step aside and allow Him to work through their weakness, their tears, and their surrender. The moment we let go of self-sufficiency, the moment we bow and surrender every ounce of pride, that is the moment the power of God begins to flow freely through His trials, heartbreaks, and brokenness are God's workshop to refine and prepare us for His glory. Every difficulty we face, every pain that pierces our heart, every disappointment that shakes our soul is not meant to destroy us, but to mold us into vessels fit for His use. Many try to run from suffering, to avoid the pain, but the truth is that it is in the fire of trials that our faith is purified and our hearts are softened. God does not call the perfect, the untested, or the comfortable to accomplish his deepest purposes. He calls the humble, the broken, the willing. When we endure loss, rejection, or confusion and still cling to him, we learn dependence on a power greater than our own. The heart that has been crushed by circumstances becomes pliable, flexible, and ready to receive the Spirit in fullness. In heartbreak, we are taught compassion. In disappointment, we learn perseverance. In failure, we discover humility. These moments strip away the self-reliance, the pride, and the illusions that we can do life on our own. They open our eyes to the reality of God's sovereignty and his unending grace. When we allow ourselves to be shaped in this workshop of trials, we are being prepared to carry his glory, to walk in his authority, and to minister with a depth that only comes from having been refined. The vessel that has been pressed and tested will hold more of God, will shine brighter in his presence, and will become a channel through which miracles flow. It is in the broken places, in the quiet moments of surrender, and in the nights of tears that God's hand works most powerfully, transforming ordinary hearts into instruments capable of extraordinary works. The earthen vessel, fragile and humble, holds the treasure of God because it depends fully on him. Imagine a simple clay jar, easily cracked, easily shaped, yet within it rests a priceless treasure. That is how God views our hearts when we come to him in humility. He does not look for strength, brilliance, or perfection. He looks for hearts that are willing to be emptied of pride and filled with his Spirit. When we depend on our own understanding, when we insist on doing things our way, the vessel remains hard, unyielding, and the treasure cannot flow. But when we admit our weakness, when we surrender our will, when we bow in humility before him, God's Spirit moves freely within us. It is not the strong, the talented, or the unbroken that become the channels of his power. It is the one who knows they are nothing without him. The earthen vessel is fragile, yet it is exactly that fragility that makes it suitable for the glory of God. The cracks, the broken places, the imperfections allow the light of God to shine through in ways that nothing else can. It is in our humility, our dependence, and our brokenness that God's power finds expression. We begin to understand that the treasure is not in our abilities, but in his Spirit. The moment we accept that we cannot hold the fullness on our own, the moment we relinquish control and trust him completely, the treasure of God is released through us. Like clay in the hands of the potter, we are shaped, molded, and refined. Our fragility becomes our strength, because it is the place where God's power rests, where his miracles flow, and where his glory is made manifest. In broken hearts, resist God's refining fire and block the flow of his Spirit. Many of us want the power, the anointing, the miracles, and yet we resist the process that brings them. We cling to comfort, to control, to the life we have built for ourselves, and in doing so, we unknowingly close the door to God's fullness. The refining fire is not punishment, it is preparation. It is meant to melt away pride, to remove the self-sufficiency, to soften the heart so that God can pour his Spirit in without restraint. The heart that refuses breaking, the soul that resists trials, the mind that clings to its own understanding, these things are obstacles to God's power. He cannot move freely where there is resistance. The unbroken vessel believes it has what it needs. It trusts in its own strength and wisdom. But God's work is always done in humility, in dependence, and in surrender. When we are unwilling to yield, we prevent the Spirit from shaping us, from teaching us, from filling us to overflowing. The fire of God's refining may feel uncomfortable, even painful, but it is necessary for transformation. Those who embrace it, who allow themselves to be tested, pruned, and humbled, find that the flow of his Spirit is unstoppable. Barriers are removed, hearts are softened, and lives are changed. The unbroken resist, but the broken surrender. The unbroken cling, but the surrendered are free. And it is in that freedom, in that yielding, that the Spirit can move powerfully, touching hearts, bringing healing, and accomplishing what human hands alone could never achieve. Surrender and humility empty the vessel, allowing God's power to overflow and transform lives. Many of us struggle with the idea of letting go, of yielding control, of admitting that we cannot do this on our own. Yet it is in that very surrender that the Spirit finds room to move. A heart that clings to pride, to self-will, or to its own agenda cannot carry the fullness of God's power. The cup must be emptied before it can be filled. The heart must be humbled before it can overflow. When we lay down our rights, our ambitions, and our desire to manage every detail, we open ourselves to the miraculous. It is a posture of dependency, a recognition that without Him, we are nothing, and with Him, we can do all things. The empty vessel becomes pliable, ready to be shaped and used in ways beyond our imagination. As the Spirit flows into a surrendered heart, old fears fall away, doubts dissolve, and the supernatural begins to manifest. Healing comes, relationships are restored, the broken are lifted, and lives are changed. The humbleness of the heart invites the power of God to dwell within, and suddenly, what was impossible becomes possible. We begin to see His hand moving in situations we could never have handled alone. The overflow of God's presence becomes evident in our words, our actions, and our very being. The key is not striving, not self-effort, but yielding, humility, and trust. When we truly surrender, we stop holding back. And God's Spirit fills the empty spaces, works through the cracks, and accomplishes the extraordinary in ordinary vessels. Only through breaking, pruning, and letting go of self can we become vessels fit for God's extraordinary work. Too often we cling to our comfort, our routines, and our own understanding, thinking that life will work out if we just hold on tightly. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and His purposes require vessels that are pliable and humble. The pruning process may feel painful, even unbearable at times, but it is necessary for growth. It removes what is unnecessary, exposes what is weak, and prepares us for the fullness of His Spirit. Every trial, every loss, every moment that stretches us beyond our strength is a divine shaping, a molding that makes room for the supernatural. God does not call the unbroken to carry His glory, because the unbroken are filled with their own ideas, their own will, and their own ambitions. They cannot be channels for His power because there is no emptiness for Him to fill. But when we allow ourselves to be broken, when we bow in humility, when we let go of self-reliance, God finds a vessel that can be filled without obstruction. The Spirit can flow freely, miracles can happen, and lives can be transformed through hands, words, and hearts that have been surrendered. It is in the brokenness that intimacy with God deepens, dependence becomes natural, and the joy of His presence saturates every part of our being. The refining, pruning, and breaking are not signs of rejection but invitations to greater purpose. Each crack, each trial, each moment of letting go is a step toward becoming a vessel fit for extraordinary work, a channel through which God's power flows with authority, impact, and glory.